Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. Joan served the state of California as a member on the Arts Council and on the Film Commission. She was formerly on the Architectural Commission and fulfilled 2 terms on the Fine Arts Commission for the city of Beverly Hills. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, Condé Nast Publications, and the Hearst Corporation, Joan covered the world of fashion, the mysteries of food, the excitement of theater, and the international art scene. She continues to find people who are on the cutting edge of their professions. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're here taping at the Hollywood Museum in the historic Max Factor building. Our guests are performer Ian Ruskin and composer Lee Holdridge. Writer-performer Ian Ruskin was born in London, spent his grade school days in Philadelphia, returned to London for high school, and then went on to train at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. He's performed on stages in Europe and the US. And before we go any further, what was all that traveling about?
It was actually my stepfather was an engineer who worked on oil refineries.
Oh.
So we actually traveled to India, Finland, Venezuela, but mainly America.
Much
all
more.
Around America. Yes.
Much more travel than I thought.
A lot.
Has
yes.
that worked into any of the plays that you've written?
You know, it hasn't. I've always written plays about other people,
yes,
historical
I see that.
figures. Maybe I have to write one about me one day.
Yes, because you've got to get that into. Was there acting in your family? How did you come to act?
You know, I think my mother would have loved to have been an actress. She wasn't, but she would have. She was English. Obviously, she was born in London. But really, I just from when I was about 10, it was the natural thing to do.
But then was it naturally writing and producing because you've written and produced for radio and
Right,
yourself?
no, that only began, 12, 15 years ago.
Oh, so
I mean, I was an
wasn't
actor. I was always an actor,
Yeah.
but never a writer or producer or director or...
You never were?
No, not until about 12 years ago.
But see, radio, can't you hear your voice? Radio is your voice.
Well, I love radio as well. I just think it's a great... In fact, the first thing I produced when I began this whole phase of my life were 2 radio documentaries.
Oh, they were?
Which I narrated, but you know, they were, I interviewed people and
like
put them
that.
together.
Oh, you
Yes.
did. Well, you seem to like being alone. You seem to like this one-person
Yes.
kind of show, right? You do a lot of one-person shows.
I do. The first one I ever really did was called The Man Himself. That one I didn't write.
But it wasn't about you, the man
no,
himself.
No. It was a very interesting study of an English man, working class man in London, very lonely and kind of on the verge of becoming involved with a very right-wing, almost fascist organization. It was a very interesting study of this man.
Was he a real man?
No.
Oh, he wasn't a real man.
So I performed that in theatre in England, in repertory and then in London. And I found it's very different a one-man show because you're speaking directly to the audience.
Yes, but also you don't have any cues from anyone of what to do.
No.
Is that, you have lights though?
Oh, yes.
That helps.
The lines can be, actually the older I get, the harder it is to learn the lines. Writing the plays is easy, but learning the lines is hard.
But your director, you obviously always have a director,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And you need a director.
Yes, you need to have at least, for some period of time, an outside eye. Since I write it and perform it, you need someone to give another little perspective.
And then does that person, we talked about lights and music and scenery, do those cue you for your lines when you move from one spot to another, or?
Quite often, all the plays I write have quite a few either music or sound effect cues.
Yes, does that help?
And it does, yes. With the Harry Bridges play, the central part of the story is this huge funeral march. and these battles. So I have the sounds of the battles and the sounds of the funeral music
I see.
that I talk over.
But
So
in the man himself?
man
was there?
himself, I don't think we had any sound effects.
You don't just do one person plays. You do other things as well, right?
Well,
Don't you?
no. You know, on stage, I've only done one person plays for a long time.
Oh
It's
my
not,
gosh.
that's not a deliberate.
I don't want to say you don't like actors.
No, don't, because I do like actors. I do, I mean, I do voice work with groups of actors where we work on films and things
Yeah,
like that.
voiceover.
But it just happens. What actually happened was so I had done The Man himself.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was cast in a play with other actors about Harry Bridges, this union leader, and I played
yes.
Harry.
Let's talk about that, because Harry Bridges was a very interesting person, wasn't he?
Oh, he was fascinating. I mean, I guess the word is radical. I mean, a man who in the 1920s and 30s, through the 70s, but he wanted a national health care system.
Right.
He wanted Social Security before it existed. He wanted real democracy in the labor movement, things like this.
He was thought of as being very, not avant-garde, but overly liberal.
Well, he was accused of being a communist.
Well, way liberal.
I always say, because I'm often asked, was he a communist?
Was he?
I always say, well, he was to the left of the communists.
He was that far? He was that far?
Well, he was a
had so
Marxist.
many
He was a Marxist.
Oh, he
But
was.
it was a period where the American Communist Party had, I think, close to 3 million members. It was a different time.
It was very.
And it was about, America was in the Depression. So the idea of the Communist Party was to do with economics. It wasn't to do with overthrowing the government.
No, but we were all afraid that it was going to be overthrowing the government. Now we can look back and say that.
Yes, it would have overthrown capitalism.
That's right.
Which is a different thing.
And that's why he was so far this way, you would say.
Yeah.
But how long was that? How long did that run? Did it travel, that play?
That play, I've performed that over 200 times, certainly.
You did.
And all over America, England, Canada, Australia, and Hawaii.
Wow.
I'm very lucky that because Bridges, the union that he founded,
Yeah.
was the Longshore Union of the
Yes,
dock
it
workers.
was, wasn't it?
So I have gone to, obviously, Los Angeles, San Francisco,
Port cities.
Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Melbourne, Honolulu, all the great cities of the world.
All the ports,
Because
right?
they have the ports.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
You have the ports. But they're really tough, aren't they? The longshoremen. And he must have been tough.
He was incredibly tough.
Was he?
He was not a big or strong physical man.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I was attracted to about him was that he would go to union meetings of his union, and they would be booing him and telling him to get the hell home. And he would stand up there and just take it and then start talking and say,
Get his point across.
And so, at the end, they were all cheering him.
Isn't that great? Well, a different type of person was Tom Paine.
Yes.
And you did a one-person show
Yes.
To begin the world over again. Tell us about that.
Right, that's my much newer show.
Yes.
I wrote that maybe 2 years ago. As with Bridges, when I discovered Thomas Paine and began to read about him, and people talked to me about him, I was just amazed at this man, of the way he thought, he was such a fascinating man. One thing was, he came to Philadelphia from England when he was 37. And up to that point, his life had been really a series of failures.
And doing what?
He'd been a
Politician?
corset maker, a tax inspector. His first wife had died. He left his second wife. He went bankrupt. Just an endless series of disaster.
Bummers.
Yes.
Bummer, bummer, bummer.
So he arrives in Philadelphia. He's 37, and he changes the world. He starts the American Revolution with common sense. He then went to France and sort of defined the French Revolution.
Amazing, isn't it? From the background that you say?
Yes, something happened when he came to Philadelphia that I think, and this is a speculation, but that something was released in him, that he really I say in the play that I felt I could begin my own life over again.
So how does he sound when you
Uh,
on
well,
the stage?
I use what you would say is a slight London accent, so I talk a little bit like that.
And what
I
about
sort
your
of-
costuming?
Oh, I have a wonderful full costume, 18th century costume.
18th, I see.
Beautiful. Thomas Paine may have had what in England is known as a Norfolk accent, because that's where he was
I see.
born.
Yeah.
But Norfolk is a bit like that. It's sort of a bit like a country accent.
Oh,
and
but
it's
you
a
can
bit
do it.
difficult to understand. So I thought I would do a sort of London.
I see.
Since he lived in
and then you do that with from wharf rats to lords.
the Lords of the Docks. Yeah.
And are the docks what we're talking about? The
Well, yes, that
longshoremen
title
docks?
is a very long. My titles are very long. I
Very
apologize. But these dock workers, this is back in the 1930s. They were known as wharf rats. That's what they were called.
Yeah.
And it was the work was very hard. It was very hard to get. They were very badly treated. So when they finally had their big strike, and they won almost everything they were striking for, they considered themselves to then be lords of the docks. They went
then
from
they
being
changed,
the wharf rats to being
right.
the lords of the docks.
I see, I see. And there was a film on PBS about
Yes,
that.
we made a film of my play. We shot
Oh, it was
shot a
your
live
play.
performance. Yes,
And Haskell Wexler did it?
he directed it. Yes,
How did that happen?
I was very lucky. He was on my board of directors, because by now I had a non-profit organization.
I see.
And I did a performance down in San Pedro in the port in this beautiful old theater for 1,000 longshore workers, men and women. And it was an amazing night. And I phoned up Haskell, or the woman I was working with. I think she actually phoned Haskell and said, "This is what happened. Would you make a film?" And he phoned back 20 minutes later and said, "Yep."
I'll be right there.
And that was it.
Is that right?
So we shot the film in the same theater.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It was an amazing
Because
night.
that San Pedro is like the
That's,
docks.
Yes, that's where they
That's
are.
the
That's where
docks,
they live
yeah.
and work. And this theater was built in 1934, which was the year of the big strike.
Oh.
Beautiful Art Deco called the Warner Grand. Just,
Oh, I know that.
yes,
They do a film festival
yes,
there.
they have film
They do.
festivals and all kinds of things.
Yes,
It's a
it's
wonderful
wonderful.
space.
Do you continue to do films and TV, or?
No, I really, again, not by any deliberate choice. I do voice work in films and
For that.
television.
But you don't actually act on films?
No, I haven't. I mean,
That's amazing.
I don't- I
Especially
just-
living here in LA.
I know. Well, the other thing, the reason I'm doing the plays finally in
Are
LA,
you doing them?
I'm doing both of them, is I've never done them in a public run in Los Angeles.
Oh,
and this
so
is
you're
where I live.
doing one at the Lillian Theater,
Right, that's-
and you're
yes.
doing one at the
Electric Lodge,
Electric
yes.
Lodge. So one's in Venice or Santa Monica.
Right,
Electric Lodge.
yeah, it's in Venice, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the other one's in Hollywood.
Yeah.
But also, at the same time, you're doing a new project on Barbara Dane.
Yes,
Who is that?
Barbara Dane. You'll see a common theme of radicals in my work.
I see.
Barbara Dane is a singer. She's 86 now. She began as a folk singer, singing with people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. She then became a blues singer, and then more into jazz. She sang with Louis Armstrong, with every major blues and jazz singer. And she was always a very radical person politically.
How'd you find her?
I interviewed her husband about Harry Bridges.
Oh, how interesting.
And then I met her, and then I realized this is a woman who deserves a documentary, because, you know, she's the kind of person who, some examples. She was the first American after the revolution invited to Cuba, where she met Castro, was with him for 3 or 4 hours. Her son was with them. He and Castro were shooting hoops for hours, because Castro loved basketball. This is in the 1960s. She was... when Columbia University, when the students took over the university, and I think it was 1971, she went in, snuck in, on what turned out to be the last night before the police came in. So she was there for that whole episode. She was at the Pentagon protest when they tried to levitate the Pentagon, which they didn't manage.
So she has been everywhere.
Oh,
in the
she
United,
just seemed,
she's
yes.
been everywhere.
Yes, she just seemed to be in those. So her stories are amazing, because they're almost like they're the stories of America going through the second half of the 20th century.
Thank you so much, Ian.
My pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you for watching this part. We'll be right back with composer Lee Holdridge. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm here at the Hollywood Museum with composer Lee Holdridge, who was born in Haiti and raised in Costa Rica, where he studied violin with Hugo Mariani, the then conductor of the National Symphony of Costa Rica. He moved to Boston in high school to study with Henry Lasker, and then he moved to New York, where he started his professional career as a composer, writing chamber music, rock songs, everything, theater music, and you were scoring for films as well. And Lee has gotten many, many awards for his work, including gold and platinum hit songs, right?
That's
and
correct.
Now you're doing an opera, from hit songs to opera songs.
Well, actually, I started writing opera early on. I was interested in the art form even when I was a teenager.
Because it seems like you started with a classical background,
I
and
did.
then when you got to New York,
Yeah.
everything changed.
Well, I did. I come from strictly a classical background. I mean, I started on the violin. All my first compositions were orchestral compositions. I did vocal settings of poetry. I was very interested in solo instruments and chamber groups. I wrote for all these different ensembles.
How'd you get all that work once you got to New York?
Well, when I was in school, I wrote it mostly for the school orchestras. Both the high school had two orchestras, and there was Newton Music School.
Oh, you were in Newton?
And I was in Newton, and they had a chamber orchestra, and then I would get musician friends together, and we would do little recitals and stuff like that.
And that was when you were still a teenager, probably,
I was still a
right?
teenager, yes.
So then, how did Neil Diamond come into your life?
Well, that comes much later, because I went to New York, and I studied music in New York for a while, and while I was in New York, of course, you know, I had to make a living, and what happened was I got some work in the theater, writing ballet arrangements for Broadway shows. I met Michael Bennett, who was then, I worked on his first show.
Fantastic.
Imagine that.
Really fantastic.
I was very drawn to ballet, and I actually am the co-author of a ballet called Trinity, that it's a staple of the Joffrey Ballet, and it was a huge hit from about 1970 on.
They took it on the road, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
They played it
They
because
performed it all over the world. It was fantastic.
I saw that. And
yes.
what did you write for that, the music?
There were two composers, and I was one of the composers.
I see.
And then film came later. When I got to New York, I got very interested in film as an art form, and I started going to all the art houses in New York and seeing all the fantastic foreign movies. And I found out about these incredible directors, from Francois Truffaut to Vittorio De Sica, and then the American directors, the retrospectives. And that got my interest going in film music.
Is that right?
Yes, so it comes later in my life.
But then you did a lot of TV series, and you composed for a lot of films, documentaries.
Everything. What happened was, while I was in New York, I started doing arrangements for pop artists for RCA Records. And there was one producer who loved Neil Diamond songs, and we would arrange.
Is that right?
And I guess Neil Diamond heard one of the songs I had arranged and really loved what I did, and eventually they contacted me.
Because it was a long relationship, wasn't it?
Well, 4 years. I worked for him for 4
long.
years, and it culminated in the film Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which I did all the orchestral scoring for. And
do you conduct the orchestra at that
yes,
time?
I do.
I was going to ask you if once you write the music, if you conduct as well. And for the film, you also conduct that?
I do conduct, yes.
Do you help with the editing of that, or do they do it without you at that point? Or is it already edited when you come in?
No. You compose the music. Generally, you compose it to fit the scene. So you're recording it to actually fit the particular moment.
So you've already done it with the film.
Occasionally, they make a change afterwards, then you have to go back and work with the editors and make an edit in the music. And this happens from time to time.
And you have a long line of films.
Yes.
And did that bring you to L.A.?
Well, Neil Diamond brought me to L.A. And, you know, I moved here because I was practically doing all my work here after a while. So I moved here in the early 70s. And at that point, once I was here and working for him, that opened a lot of doors to movies and television and all these different things. But I continued my interest in love of concert music. So I continued to write pieces for chamber orchestras. I had a lot of them performed here. I eventually composed my violin concerto, which is a big full-length work for full symphony orchestra.
Your background, you just wrote the music for Dulce Rosa,
Yes.
the opera for the LA Opera.
Right, right.
And it's so melodic. It has, you feel comfortable with the music.
Well, that's something, I'm a bit of a rebel in this time.
Is it?
And I think what happened, for me, what happened in the second half of the 20th century is everybody became obsessed with 12-tone music and minimalism and all the different styles. And
12-tone meaning what? Explain
well, meaning
it.
there should be no sense of key, no sense
see.
of tonality. You should
Just
be constantly pulled apart. Now, it's an interesting experiment and an idea, but I think after a while it drives you nuts.
But maybe that's why it was so easy to listen to what you've written.
And I'm drawn to the melodic statement, and I love the voice. I love the voice singing in a beautiful way, in a lyrical way. Even in the dramatic scenes, I want the flow of the way the voice goes.
But is that different from a film to a person singing on stage, like to your soprano? You make the music to fit that soprano's voice, I guess.
Well, yeah, it is different because in a film you're melding what you're doing into the film and the story and the style, and it can be very different. In an opera, in a sense, you are the center stage. The music is the main thing, and so but writing for the voice is not unlike writing for the orchestra. You have to know the instruments. You have to know what they sound like, how they're played. You know, singers have to breathe. There's minor details. There are places in the voice where things sound good and might not sound good in other places. Certain words might not sound good above certain notes, so you think about that a lot too.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. You have to think about all these different things.
Do you have someone singing it for you once you've written it?
No, I sing it, but you don't want to hear it.
You sing all
but
the
I hear it in my head. I basically.
So you can hear the soprano.
Yes, I picture what it's going to sound like. I can hear the soprano. I can sense, I say, okay, yeah, that's going to sound good. No, that's not going to sound good. Let me change it a little bit. But it's always very exciting when someone does sing it.
Has Dulce Rosa played anywhere else?
Not yet. This is the premiere. This is the solo initial performances of it, and we're hoping that it will
So different people will be conducting it depending on where it goes.
Down the road, yes, yes.
And it's a full-length opera.
It is a full. It's 2 hours. You know, operas used to be 4 and 5 hours long, but I don't think we live in a world where that's practical anymore.
Well, we saw Figaro the other night, 3 hours and 40 minutes, I think.
Well, you know, very often in the early classical times, an opera was interrupted by a couple of dinner breaks.
Yes.
You know, the people
they
went
still
out
do
and
that,
they
don't they? In England, they still do that in Glyndebourne.
But I think from a practical standpoint now, I think it's good to maybe tell a story in a couple of hours, and you go, you have Act 1, intermission, Act 2, and then you're done.
Okay, that's fine, a couple of hours. But tell us how long it took for you to get this opera on the boards for a couple of hours.
Well, Richard Sparks, I wrote my first opera in 1976. I wrote a one-act opera based on a Khalil Gibran play called Lazarus and His Beloved. I had done scenes of operas before that, but this was the first time I completed a full opera.
It was a complete opera?
Yes.
And who did you work with at that time?
I did the libretto myself.
You did.
I adapted it from his play. Then in the early 90s, when the Los Angeles Opera was gearing up and starting to do things, Peter Hemmings, the then director of the LA Opera, wanted to do something for their outreach program.
Oh, with the education?
With the education, and I was approached, and they said, you know, maybe we could do something with the Latin background.
Which was perfect.
So I had an idea for a short story that I thought would work really well, and I said, I need to find a librettist, and that's how I met Richard Sparks.
Oh.
So our journey begins then. Now we did 5 more one-act operas.
Did you?
Or 4 or 5 more.
So he wrote the libretto, you composed the music.
We found that we had a great collaboration. We really worked well together.
And do you find the work together, and is it all from stories, or is it original by Richard?
Some of it is original, and some of it is adaptations of stories. And Richard, after a few of these, he said, you know what, we need to do something big. And there have been a lot of American operas, so we sort of said, let's look at Latin America. I said, there's not a lot of operas that are set in that part of the world. So we both realized we both loved Isabel Allende. I love a lot of the South American novelists.
And she lives here.
She lives here.
She lives in California.
What a coincidence. But
Perfect.
he brought her up, and I said, yeah, I love her novels, and I love her writing. And so he started reading everything. And we read through everything, but he found the short stories of Eva Luna, which is a collection that she had written. Literally one of the last stories he read
which was
Una Venganza, which is he said, oh, there it is. There's the story. And he knew that we might elaborate on it a little bit, but we felt the basic premise was fantastic.
But you didn't keep the title. You didn't keep that title.
Well, I don't know. You know, we went around in circles about that. We didn't want people to think that it was just about that. You know, it's more than that. Because she, even in the shorts, Una Venganza means a vengeance.
A vengeance, yeah.
But even she in her story said this is a love story, believe it or not.
I see.
And so we said, you know, we've got to have some element that maybe suggests that it's also a love story.
And then how did you decide? You're on a small stage at the Broad.
This is the thing. When we finally got the piece, you know, we started writing it, we decided we wouldn't make it too large because, you know, it's very costly to mount a new opera these days.
Right.
And LA Opera was kind of like, don't make it too expensive.
But it was brilliant what you did.
Well, you know, we kept it, the chorus is only 16, there's 6 main characters, the orchestra's 35. And in thinking about that, Domingo came up with the idea, he said, why don't we do it at the Broad? He said, it reminded him of a lot of those smaller opera houses in Europe that are
fabulous.
So marvelous. And I was concerned at first, but then once you're in there, the whole audience is right there with the singers.
Yes, it's very small. What about the acoustics?
The acoustics are wonderful.
They were fine for me.
You can hear everything in there. And I think, you know, I even went up to the balcony during rehearsals, and you're like right there.
Yes, which is so brilliant.
Seats.
But what I wanted to get to was Jenny Oken, who did the sets, and she did all these projections that took you right into every scene.
Well, this was an interesting idea. Both Richard and Jenny and I had talked about. Richard and Jenny had done a Don Giovanni in Burbank with some projections, and they tried it out, and Richard said, you know, this is really a fantastic way to do an opera. And I had been expressing the desire. I said, one of the things I don't like about the old operas is the stop and start when they have to stop and change a set and start.
I know. It's true.
I feel that the mood goes down. And I said, Richard, I want this thing to flow. Can we get it to flow?
Yes, and when you bring the father in to his place and then you walk in, it looks like you're walking into his manor.
Well, then Richard and Jenny said, we'll do this with projections, and you'll be able to have the flow. Now, Jenny is an extraordinary artist. She's a photographer, but she does things with the photographs. They're just not just photographs. They're actually art pieces that she's created.
And she does. She has a gallery show at Craig Kroll. She's been showing there. And she did a portrait of me. Did you know that?
Oh, no, I didn't know that. Oh, great. I'd have to look for that. And I had seen her work. I knew it was very exciting. And she and Richard did 2 trips to South America, Central and South America, to photograph. All those photographs that you see, all the artwork that you see in Dulce Rosa is from that part of the world.
It feels like it.
And since I grew up in that part of the world, traveled all over there, when I would look at them, I'd say, oh yeah, I know those places. I know exactly where they are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It really brought the audience in, and I love the way Jenny opened. I mean, the projection was changing all the time.
Right.
And we really felt a part of it. And I commend you for doing this fabulous opera.
Well, I think Richard said it best. He said, this is not a modern opera, this is a new opera.
Thank you so much, Lee Holdridge.
My pleasure.
And thank you for being with us today. Keep writing to JAQUINN1@AOL.com. We'll see you next time.